Now, Britain and Finland are discussing plans to require third parties to do more to block the Russian shadow oil tanker fleet operating in the Baltic and the Channel.
Also, Russian missiles struck the city of Kharkiv overnight. The ongoing Russian offensive in the nearby areas has led to intensified attacks on the city in recent days. And with us to talk about Ukraine-Russia war, we are joined by Andrii Osadchuk, Ukrainian MP, Golos Liberal Party.
Welcome to the program.
Good evening. Thank you for having me here.
So, as I said before, we are talking about Russia, we're talking about the situation, yet Russia is circumventing sanctions, and we have been talking about it for, at least a couple of months, yet nothing has been done to prevent it. What is your take on that?
Oh, come on, we're talking on that more than 1.5 years. Because in reality, during all 2022, everyone was discussing that oil and gas is a blood for war. It's economical blood for Russia to continue warfare. And as you correctly presented, only in the beginning of 2023, there was the first packages from European Union on sanctions on crude oil, this well-known so-called ceiling on $60. But everything was done extremely slowly from Western side, mostly as any other sanctions. And it was giving Russia a lot of time to adapt the logistics, to create this so-called shadow tanker fleet, as you properly described just a few minutes ago. And yes, they continue to sell huge amounts of oil to the global market. And unfortunately, we may conclude that from one side, the West did a lot of efforts to make economical pressure on Russia through sanctions. But many of these sanctions were still very political and very declarative, but didn't give expected result. From another side, it is wrong to say that Russia is not suffering from sanctions. Yes, it's difficult for them. Yes, they're losing money. Yes, all logistics are very complex. But as I said, still they're making quite a big money. If I'm not mistaken, just in 2024, they've got something like $120 billion on sales of crude oil for this less than 5 months, meaning that it's still huge money, which helps Russia a lot. What shall we do? Definitely, we need to execute sanctions. We are in this discussion with the European Union, with G7 for the last almost 6-7 months. Everyone understood this, and only during last several months, we see certain improvements. We see China banks, which became very concerned about sanctions and their limited payments with Russia. We see good story with India rupees, because India was very smart. They were buying a lot of Russian oil, but they paid them in rupees. And in certain moment of time, Russians understood that they can do nothing with these rupees. And as I know, India refused to change anything in their policy. And till today, they buy Russian oil. Russia reports sales, but in reality, it's kind of fake sales because they don't have access to real money. So these rupees, in fact, I reinvested in some businesses inside of India, meaning that India has a double positive effect for their economy.
Yeah. Let me just jump in on that, Andrii. Because, I mean, we are also, because you mentioned India there, and I think one of those two major nations that are benefiting from the shadow fleet was China and India, a lot of those destinations. But it's also, I think, very much not just Russian oil, right? This is also Venezuelan, this is also Iranian. Now, this shadow fleet, if we look at it collectively as well, this is also in these legacy, these subpar tankers that are not really fit for purpose anymore. I think that's also the other danger here. One thing that we discovered here, that about more than 20 years old tankers, some years ago, they made up just 3% of the global tanker fleet. And now it looks like they'll be up to about 12%. Now, I'm wondering here as well, sanctions is one way. But then what about your take on potentially the shipping industry itself? Because we've just shown that through one of our reporters, there's some really close calls here from an environmental point of view, that if something happens here, I mean, this is going to be a huge reputational damage also for the shipping industry. So is there something where the shipping industry can step in here and do something about it?
I think that's bigger than shipping industry. You mentioned environmental risks, and we have to look at this big picture. Because yes, from one side, it's the story about weakness of Western sanctions, about weakness of the West on execution of the sanction. But from another side, we shall to discuss the risks. And the risk is not only that Russia is still making money. The risks are huge for environment. Because from one side, we're fighting for environmental rules and laws for last couple of decades. And from another side, as you correctly mentioned, this shadow fleet was increased from 3% to almost 12%, creating huge threat to the world because each of these tankers may collapse any moment in any place in the global waters, creating huge problems. So that's why we are calling the Western governments, the United States, the European Union, to do something with this. And if we see that it was just 3% a couple of years ago, meaning that the demand was also in place that years, but the European Union and mostly the United States was able to control this. I think the situation almost the same right now. So we just need the political will from the West to push all these guys. Because again, it's not only risk for Ukraine, for the Europe from the military point of view, because of money which is given to Russia, but it's huge environmental risk for the world, and definitely it's a huge reputational risk for the industry, for transportation industry, which may lead to increase of the prices, may lead to increase of the insurance costs, and so on and so forth, meaning that the problem is huge.
Mm-hmm. Now, Andrii, I would like to talk about Ukraine right now. We know that border towns in the Kharkiv region have been evacuated. We have been also reporting about deaths and injuries in that area. Tell us about the most current situation in Kharkiv.
So we all need to understand that the old border with Russia is a front line. Yes, for the last 1.5 years, the most hot points of the battlefield was in the south and in the southeast, but during all these months and years, we understood that any second Russians may attack Kharkiv region or Sumy region or Chernigiv region because it is the direct border with Russia. And for most of the experts in Ukraine, for military, it was not a big surprise that Russians started these new attacks in Kharkiv region. One was saying that it was unexpected, but it is not really true. The truth is that it's really difficult for Ukraine to keep control over 1,000 kilometers front line, meaning hot battle front line, which is extremely difficult for any army in the world. And yes, especially last week, it was extremely tough days and hours in the Kharkiv region. But based on information which I have for the moment, Ukraine was able to stabilize the situation in Kharkiv region. Yes, we evacuate people from the villages which are close to the battle line. It is normal procedure, unfortunately. So people are out of there, and situation is more or less under control. As about Kharkiv, everyone shall remember that it is the second largest city in Ukraine. There are still about 1 million people inside of the city, and Kharkiv is under daily permanent attacks by Russian missiles and artillery, meaning that we were and we are demanding more support for air defense, because that's the only way how we can protect civilian infrastructure and civilians in Ukraine.
And also, Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky just recently said that he is urging Western allies to take a more proactive stance in the conflict with Russia. Andrii Osadchuk, Ukrainian MP, thank you very much for being here with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.